So, good morning, class. Welcome back to our class for this Saturday. This is our second meeting for the semester. And previously, we have already discussed some important notes on the introduction to the criminal justice system here in the Philippines. So, of course, I hope that you will not forget all the important topics that I've already discussed with you. So, these are the keywords that we have to always remember. Okay, so as a review, let's have a short discussion of these words because I want to emphasize them because for most of your school life, while you are enrolled in criminal law and jurisprudence, you will always encounter these words. So I hope that as early as now, you will take note of these important terms that you will always continue to encounter, okay, as we study law. Okay, so first let's discuss dolo. What is dolo? Dolo are those felonies which are intentional. Okay, so consider this intentional felonies, and the elements of dolo include freedom, intent, intelligence. Okay, so these three must always be present to hold a person liable for the commission or omission of a crime. So freedom, the person who committed a punishable act or omission must have committed the same with freedom. Otherwise, if he was under compulsion, karang sige, pirit lahiya, nga himuon ito nga act which is punishable by law, then that could either be a justifying or exempting circumstance. Okay, so just a short review. Under the revised penal code, so we've discussed, diba? Prior to this meeting, we've already discussed that there are several sources of criminal law in the Philippines. But one of those sources include the revised penal code. Okay, so under the revised penal code, we have from Article 11 and Article 12. Article 11 discusses justifying circumstances. So, what are justifying circumstances? These are circumstances that affect criminal liability. And if such circumstances are present, then a person, even if he performed a criminal act defined under the revised penal code or a special penal law, he cannot be held liable for that because his act was actually justified. So what do we mean when we say justified? Okay, for example, no? One of the justifying circumstances enshrined under the revised penal code is self-defense. Okay, so self-defense, a person is allowed to protect himself, no, or his rights or his property against unlawful aggression. So if a person is acting in self-defense, no, in defense of himself, then he can be what? He cannot be held liable for the commission of a crime because his acts were justified. Okay. Likewise, we also have exempting circumstances. So when we talk about freedom, most of them are actually if the person who committed the crime did not have the freedom, in other words, he was compelled, ginpirit or napiritan lahiya, no? Nabuhaton, it usa, nabutang. Even if he commits a crime, no, out of compulsion or insuperable cause, or any by accident, no, uh, it negates freedom. No, Kalagsingon, he did not have the freedom to perform such act, then he cannot be held liable for such. So, for example, so as I mentioned, Article 12 of the revised penal code discusses the circumstances which exempt from criminal liability. The following are exempt from criminal liability. So take note, no? Number one, an imbecile or insane person, unless the latter acted during a lucid interval. So who is an imbecile and who is an insane person? An imbecile is a person who has the mental age of a 2-year-old or up to 7 years old. No, so even if his actual age is already beyond minority. For example, he is already 19, 20 years old. But it so happens that his mental capacity is that of a 2-year-old child. No, he is considered as an imbecile. And such person, because of having such mental incapacity, no, does not have what? The intelligence to understand the repercussions of his action. That's why the law recognizes that an imbecile cannot be held liable for the commission of a crime. And an imbecile or an insane person is actually exempt from criminal liability. So, Section 2 of Article 12, a person under, it's no longer 9 years old. So you will probably still see this in the revised penal code. But with the enactment of the Juvenile Justice Welfare Act, the age of criminal liability has already been increased. So here, instead of 9 years old, it should already be considered as 15 years old. Okay? A person who is under 15 years of age is exempt from criminal liability. So take note of that, ha? If a person is 14 years old, or 14 years old, because under 15 years old, so matikang kita ka 14, no? If a person who committed the crime of theft, for example, nangawat hiya, but he is 14 years old, even if may the commission of an act which is punishable by law, he cannot be held liable. Diri hiya pwede mapriso. No, those who are 14 years old and below cannot be imprisoned. No, although there are penalties gihapon, but he cannot be imprisoned because a person who is below 15 years old is absolutely exempt from criminal liability. But what about those over 15 years old and above? No, we also have number 3. A person over 15, dari na 9 years old ha, over 15 years of age and under 18. No, instead of 15 din hininga sentence 18. It's because this provision of the revised penal code was repealed by the Juvenile Justice Welfare Act. So now this provision will read a person over 15 years of age and under 18 unless he has acted with discernment, in which case such minor shall be proceeded against in accordance with the provisions of Article 80 of this code. So take note, no, a person who is over 15 years of age, no? So what, 15 na yan above, but still below 18 years old because now the age of majority is 18. Okay? So if he acted with discernment, then he can be held liable. But if he did not act with discernment, then such person, even if he committed such crime, cannot be held liable for its commission. Okay, because they are exempt from criminal liability. Okay? So when such minor is adjudged to be criminally irresponsible, karagsingon, wala hiya liability, irresponsible na, diba? Not responsible. The court, in conformably with the provisions of this and the preceding paragraph, shall commit him to the care and custody of his family, who shall be charged with his surveillance and education. So, may kita tinatawag na diversion activities, no? So, may dito mag-undergo hiya, no? In some other activity. Instead of putting him to prison, he will have to undergo such other activity so that he can be reformed and be reintegrated. Magkamaada hiya reform, makapagbagong buhay hiya, and then he can be reintegrated, makabalik hiya, society as a reformed person. So ano ay prinsipyo nga balaod? It is giving the minor or the child the opportunity, no, to reform and to have a new life. So because halaba pati kinabuhi. So that's why the law recognizes his rights. So that's why the law under our criminal justice system, sa nga bata who is a minor, he is still given the protection, under our laws, and he will not be immediately imprisoned even if he committed a crime. Why? Because these persons, if aminihira, below 15 years old or 15 years old and above, but below 18 years old but did not act with discernment, when we go back to intentional felonies, the element of intelligence is not present. Kay ano? Why not? Because they cannot fully comprehend, they cannot fully understand the repercussions of their acts. Okay, so here, applying the rule, because all of these three must be present for a person to be held liable for a commission of an intentional felony. He should have the freedom, he should have the intent to commit such crime, and he should have the intelligence or the understanding of the repercussions or of the effect of such crime. So that's why a person who is an imbecile, a person who has a mental age of a 2-year-old up to 7-year-old child cannot be held liable because he does not have the intelligence to understand the repercussions and the effects of the acts that he has committed, even if such act is actually punishable by law. Okay, so what I hear, intelligence. Di rin niya naiintindihan ang acts. Also, a person who is below 15 years of age is exempt from criminal liability because under the law, a minor or a child does not have the full comprehension, again, of the acts that he is performing or committing. So take note of that, no? That's why we have exempting circumstances. So these exempting circumstances, of course, include number 1, insanity or imbecility. Number 2 and 3, minority. Okay? And now let's go to freedom and intent. So the following are also exempting circumstances. Number 4, any person who, while performing a lawful act with due care, causes an injury by mere accident without fault or intention of causing it. So here, diba, without fault or intention, it means that he did not intend to perform or to produce such injury, but nonetheless, the injury is still produced. No, so with the absence of intent, a person cannot be held liable for the commission of that crime because of the absence of intent. So what we have to understand when the law speaks of elements, no, it means requirements. So if one of the elements is or not present, it means that there was no crime. Okay? So number 5, any person who act under the compulsion of irresistible force. Karuyag signgon, no? Compulsion nga ni napiritan lahiya. No? He did not or she did not have the freedom no, the freedom of and intent to perform such act, but nonetheless, he performed the act because he was compelled to do so. Napiritan niya. Number 6, any person who acts under the impulse of an uncontrollable fear of an equal or greater injury. So may the imminent danger, no? May the kung inihiya nga tao, no, if for example, no, ano sa nga tao, gintutukan hiya himpusil, ginyaptan hiya, ano, kakastiguhon mo ito nga ito imo anak, for example, the crime committed was, let's just say, physical injuries, no? But he did not actually choose. Diri niya gusto sakitan ng iya anak. But there was another person who was forcing him na kastagi ko ka it imo anak, otherwise diri nga nini mo kastigon it imo anak, ako ikawit akon papatayon. So ganito. No? So there's another person compelling him to perform such acts. So at the end of the day, he did not have the freedom, and the lack of freedom, no, the lack of one of the elements to commit a an intentional felony or a dolo, no, is an exempting circumstance. Okay. And number 7, any person who fails to perform an act required by law when prevented by some lawful, insuperable cause. So he did not have any other choice because with the facts of the circumstances surrounding the offense, he did not have any other choice because there was a specific cause which compelled him again napiritan liwat hiya nga himuon siya nga butang, no? And yun, even if he committed such act defined by a provision of law, he cannot be held liable for that because again napiritan na hiya. He did not have what? The freedom, no? The freedom to perform such act. So amit aton um dapat diri kalimtan, no? When we talk about intentional felonies, no? When we talk about crimes which are punishable by law, there are always elements, and if an element is missing, then a person cannot be held liable for that. So for this one, for intentional felonies, the elements include freedom. So if the person was not free, no, or did not perform the act freely, no, with a full control of his or her faculties, he cannot be held liable for the commission of such crime. If a person did not have the intent to perform such act, but was compelled by some cause to perform the same, he cannot also be held liable for such crime. And lastly, if the person did not have the intelligence or the full comprehension of the commission of such act, then he cannot be held liable. But when we talk about intelligence, it's not about understanding because at the end of the day, we always have to go back to the civil law. At the civil law, ignorantia leges non excusat. What is that? Ignorance of the law excuses no one from compliance therewith. So we always have to follow the law, even if we don't understand the law fully. We still have to follow it. No, for example, that's why we have jaywalking. Diba? If we cross the street in an area where we are not supposed to cross the street, dili kita pwede magkakot, ay di na ko maalam na may jaywalking law ngayon din. Because we are presumed, no? The law presumes that we know the law. When we talk about the intelligence here in intentional felonies, we are talking about comprehension. It's being able to understand the repercussion. So, ano man ito limitations nila? Only when we talk about absence of intelligence, we are talking about imbecility, insanity, and minority. Ang wala ito matutulog. No? If you are not insane, if you are not an imbecile, or if you are not a minor, you cannot feign ignorance. Dili ka pwede magsaring, I did not have the intelligence to understand the law. Because the exemptions are only specific to imbecility, insanity, and what? Minority when it comes to intelligence. Okay? So, diri kada signon nga wala kita naka-eskwela, diri kita baltok, pwede na kita diri kasuhan or diri na kita maprepriso. Maprepriso gihapon, no? Because those, when we talk about intelligence, it exemption lahat nila is minority, imbecility, and insanity. Okay? So if you are not an insane person, if you are not an imbecile, or if you are not a minor, no? Then, diri ka makakayakan, waray na intelligence, no? Intelligence kasi din, the definition of the law when it comes to intelligence is not about the intelligence that we understand. No, ito nga intelligence na baltok. No, dito about ito. Intelligence is about what? Our mental capacity, no, to understand. Because if you are an insane person, no, may kato, lorong, no, you cannot fully understand. If you are an imbecile, no, an imbecility, a mental capacity is that of a 2-year-old up to a 7-year-old child. So, bata-bataon. It iyapan, huna-huna. No, but an imbecile must be, of course, clinically diagnosed as an imbecile. Dili ka pwede magsabi, kay bata-bataon man ako, imbecile na ako. No. There should be a clinical diagnosis that such person is an imbecile and has a mental capacity of a 2-year-old up to a 7-year-old. Dili kita magbubuot nga imbecile kita ha. It should be performed by a medical practitioner. And of course, minority. It's because under our laws, children are protected of their rights. Okay, so we are done now with intentional felonies. Let's talk about culpable felonies. Ito naman, these are felonies which are actually what? Committed by accident. What, take note in intentional felonies or DOLA, we have freedom, intent, and intelligence. But when we talk about culpable felonies, what is the intent? Because the crime was, or the omission was committed by reason of an accident. But hindi talaga intended. Or the person who committed the act did not actually intend to perform such act, but by reason of an accident, he was able to perform such act, no? So here, of course, there should be freedom of action. Kaya kung again, napilitan lahiya, himuon ito ang butang because of an inseparable cause, because of fear, because of compulsion, then again, freedom will be absent and he cannot be held liable for that crime. Again, also intelligence must also be present because a person who causes an injury because of an accident, no, cannot be held if that person is an insane person, an imbecile, or a minor, he or she cannot be held liable for that. Because again, if such person is an imbecile, an insane person, or a minor, their intelligence is not present. And again, elements are requirements. In the absence of such element, no, there is no crime. And number 3, instead of intent, here, the third element of culpable felonies are imprudence, negligence, lack of skill, or lack of foresight. Okay, so that's why we have crimes such as reckless imprudence resulting to homicide. No? Bisan man natin, for example, nakaligis kita, diri natin tinuyo nga makaligis kita. No, diri natin tinuyo nga makaligis. Kaya kino ba't gusto makaligis, di ba? Kino ba't gusto maaksidente? An accident is an unplanned, diri plinano, waray intention nga himuon ito nga butang. But if an accident occurs and by reason of such accident, a person, another person, or a victim suffers an injury, then we can still be held liable for that. So pwede ito reckless imprudence resulting to homicide, reckless imprudence resulting to physical injuries, or if the naman person na nagsuffer injury, nakadamage kita, then there is reckless imprudence resulting to damage to property. So I hope that you fully understand or you fully comprehend, the difference between intentional felonies and culpable felonies. When we say intentional felonies, there is intent to commit such crime, there is the freedom of commission, and there is intelligence on the person committing the crime, no? Intelligence, we don't talk about being a genius, no? Or being good at certain subjects. We are talking about being able to fully understand or comprehend the effects of the acts that we are performing. And if the person who committed an act is an imbecile, an insane person, or a minor, then it can be considered that intelligence is absent and such person cannot be held liable for a crime because the element of intelligence is not present. It's the same with culpable felonies, but in culpable felonies, instead of intent, we talk about imprudence, negligence, lack of skill, lack of foresight. Okay? So again, these are the exempting circumstances. Now let's go to mala inse and mala prohibita. We've already discussed this. Crimes mala inse are those crimes which are punished by the revised penal code or those defined by the revised penal code, RPC. Okay, when we say RPC, we talk about the revised penal code. And here, the act is inherently evil. No, so that's why under the revised penal code, it mga crimes punished ito dida is when we talk about crimes against persons, we talk about murder, homicide, no, infanticide, parricide, robbery, no, we have theft. So these are inherently evil, no? And in crimes mala prohibita naman, here, the acts punished are not inherently evil. For example, jaywalking. Jaywalking, it's punished by a special law, most of the time by an ordinance, no, city or municipal ordinance. Jaywalking, ipagtabok ka kalsada, it's not evil. Diba? Tumabok pala. It's not inherently evil. But at the end of the day, it is being punished because our society must be properly regulated. Kaya para magkamay-ada gihapon, hit order. The act is merely considered as a crime because it is punished by law. No, but it's not inherently evil per se. Diri evil it act. No? So, mala prohibita most of the time are those acts which are committed by or defined under a special penal law, SPL. So, duwa ka klase ha? We have the revised penal code which punishes mostly mala inse crimes or inherently evil crimes, while we have special penal laws which punishes mala prohibita crimes or crimes which are not inherently evil but are still considered crimes because of reason of law. Also, please do not forget the limitations of the lawmaking power of our legislature. Uh, who are considered as who are members of the legislature. Of course, we have the House of Representatives, our congressmen, including our party list representatives, and our Senate. So we have the upper house, which is the Senate, and we have the lower house, which is the House of Representatives, and both of them compose the legislature. And the legislature is the lawmaking body, no, of the government. But being a lawmaking body of the government, the creation of laws is not, or the right to create laws by the legislature is not absolute. Such power is also not absolute. So if when the legislative branch or the legislature enacts laws, they cannot enact laws which are ex post facto laws. No, what are ex post facto laws? Those laws are retroactive. Which are retroactive. Kariyag sigmon, no, they make acts criminal even if during the time of the commission such act was not defined under a criminal law. So, diri pwede pabalik, di ba? When we discussed this the last time, its application hit law should always be prospective, present, and future conditions. No? It cannot be retroactive. No? Dili pwede umatras, paatras it iya application. It's always prospective. Well, the Bill of Attainder naman, this is a law which deprives a person of his right to due process. So this, an example of a Bill of Attainder is wherein the legislature passes a law wherein a person can be imprisoned, no, without due process. So pwede lang hiya prisuhon bisan waray hearing ha korte, bisan waray investigation. So that is prohibited by the Constitution. Both of these provisions, ex post facto law and Bill of Attainder, are constitutional limitations. So going back to our discussions, the Constitution is the fundamental law of the land. It is the highest form of law in the land, and it is what the yardstick or the meter stick when the Supreme Court considers the constitutionality. So if there are laws which are considered as ex post facto law or Bill of Attainder laws, then they are considered as unconstitutional and will have no effect. Okay? Of course, please also do not forget our provisions on acts or omissions. No? Acts are bodily movements which tend to produce an effect in the outside world. So an act must be external, no? So dapat may ginhimo ka nga physical movement. Otherwise, if the act is internal, no? So even if I have evil thoughts of killing a person, if I do not perform a physical act of killing, I cannot be punished. Bisan pa kapera ko gimpatay, akong hunahuna ito sa nga tao. No, I cannot be punished for that. I cannot be held liable for that because only acts which are external or bodily movement, dapat may movement na mo lawas, no, which tends to produce an effect in the outside world, are punished. Also, please do not forget our rules on omission. So, under the revised penal code, there are only three ways by which an omission can be punished. So, omission is the failure to perform an act which is required by law. But under our laws, a person can only be punished, the omission, such as omission can only be punished under misprision of treason, sedition, and rebellion. So take note also generality. Criminal laws under the generality principle will apply to everyone who live and sojourn in the Philippine territory. So no, even our penal laws will apply not only to citizens of the Philippines, but also foreigners or aliens who are within our territory. Okay, so these laws will apply to all persons, regardless of nationality or citizenship. Criminal laws will apply to all persons who live and sojourn. No, even if our stay here in the Philippines is momentary. So I hope, I'm not sure if you watched it on the news. There was this German blogger, no, that he's a vlogger and his content is about pick up girls here in the Philippines. And then there was a complainant wherein he was accused of committing rape against one of those girls that he had a vlog with. And ito, no, take note, he is a German national. He's not a citizen in the Philippines. But our rape laws against rape under the revised penal code will apply to him. That's why now he is in jail. No, because there was a complaint against him for rape. Okay, territoriality. Our criminal laws generally apply within our territorial jurisdiction, within the physical territory of the Philippines, but there are exemptions in this. Treaty stipulations, conventions, and Article 2 of the revised penal code, which we will discuss as we go along with our discussion with the criminal justice system here in the Philippines and perspective, diba? I've always told you time and again, under the concept of ex post facto law or the constitutional limitation of ex post facto law, no? Penal laws must always be prospective, will apply to present and future conditions only unless the penal law is beneficial to the accused who is not a habitual offender. Okay, but we will discuss that. No, that's the exemption. So what also, yan na, marirealize ninyo, under our criminal laws, may tinatawag kita nga general general terms, but there are always exemptions. So take note of that. Okay? So these are the things that we've already discussed the last time. So I hope that you will always remember them, but I will always ask you about them. So I will make sure that you will not forget about these important concepts, because again, you will continue to encounter these terms as we go along with your course, no, in criminology or criminal justice education. Okay, so now let's move forward to lesson 2, the crime and the victim. So at the end of the lesson, you should be able to understand the relationship between the criminal and the victim. Okay, so here, under the law enforcement, under one of the pillars of the criminal justice here in the Philippines, under law enforcement, we have certain considerations that we have to always remember. So persons of interest, when there are several suspicious persons. So you can have persons of interest, no? Dili para suspect, ida mo pahira. But when the law enforcement starts to pinpoint to a certain person, when there is one suspected person left, then now that person becomes a suspect. Okay, pero pag damo pa may dapat ito tinatawag ng persons of interest. Dili pa sigurado, no, nga itong suspect. So, but once the law enforcement starts to pinpoint to a certain person, now we have a suspect. So, the prosecution is tasked, no, to prosecute the crime. Ano pag prosecute the crime? The prosecution is tasked or assigned to what? To file the case against the suspect. Once the case is filed, na-file na ang case, di rin na hiya suspect. He now becomes a respondent. Okay? So once naman, case is already filed, it has now been elevated to the court, either the Metropolitan Trial Court or Municipal Trial Court or the Regional Trial Court. Once the case is already in court, the person now becomes the accused. Amo na ito term. Dili pa ya convicted ha, dili pa ya convict. No? He becomes an accused. Ginaakusaran pala hiya. No? But then, if there's already a decision of the court, no? And ato na hiya correction facility. No? I think you've heard about the news. In news, no? It's a very common term. PDL. No, in our local term, we call them preso. But under the law, they are called persons deprived of liberty. PDL. Okay, if tapos na ang kaso, and then they are now in the penal or correction facility. But what if na-serve na nera an ira sentence? So, medyo kita tinatawag na sentensya, na human na nera serbihan na nera sentensya. And now, of course, they have to be released back to the community. They are now considered or called as ex-convict or balikbayan. Okay? So, from the beginning, in the apprehension, gindako palahera, or actually, wala pa gindako, kung pala, sususpetsahan palahera, they are persons of interest, but then when the lawmaking body or law enforcement starts to pinpoint to a certain person, now that person becomes a suspect. When the case is filed with the prosecutor, the person becomes a respondent. When the case is filed again already in the court, after na trial, no, nagkakamera ng hearing, the person becomes the accused, and if the accused is found guilty beyond reasonable doubt, He has to serve his sentence with a correction or penal facility. He becomes a person deprived of liberty, and after serving his sentence as a person deprived of liberty, he has to go back to the community, and he becomes an ex-convict or a balikbayan. So do not be confused of these terms, because these terms are usually used in the law enforcement up to up to what? Up to the time that he is reformed and is reintegrated back to the community. Okay? So there are also crimes which are considered as victimless crime. These are crimes which are actually without a victim, but does not specifically harm a certain or specific person, but the person who is considered a victim, sorry, actually consented to engage in it. So, for example, gambling, prostitution, recreational drug use. So, actually, here in drug use, it is the user who is a victim. So, di naman niya pwede both suspect and victim against himself, di ba? So, this is actually a victimless crime. But this has to be regulated because, again, di ba, these acts are actually detrimental to the society: gambling, prostitution, recreational drug use. Okay, now let's go to lesson 3. So, let's discuss the history of criminal law. So at the end of the lesson, you should be able to understand how the law evolved, how the criminal code became as it is today. Now, actually, for the information of everyone, our criminal code was largely taken from the Spanish law. No, so that's why mapapansin ninyo we have terms such as reclusion perpetua, reclusion temporal for our penalties, because majority of our criminal laws were actually taken from Spanish law. No, actually the revised penal code, was actually written in Spanish. It's just translated nowadays, but then it was initially written in Spanish. So now we will understand kaino kasugat. So let's start to look back, no? Kitaon natin, diin ba talaga nagtikang itaton mga balaod, especially for criminal law, because we are studying criminal justice in the Philippines. Okay? Okay. So the very first law, the very first recorded law of the world was the Code of Hammurabi. So this is considered as one of the first known bodies of law because it was the first law which was actually recorded. It was promulgated by King Hammurabi, who ruled the ancient city of Babylon in around 2000 BC. No, when we say BC, before Christ, before the coming of Christ. So even before Jesus Christ came, no, BC, before Christ po dito. So, even before Jesus Christ came in our history, there was already an established law. No, or there were already several established laws. And the very first one, the very first recorded law was the Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi is a set of laws that was engraved in stone tablets. No, so stone tablet pa. Ini-engrave pa yan. Not written, no, engraved, which were aimed to establish property and other rights, no? The code deals with the issues of theft, ownership, sexual relationship, and interpersonal violence. No, the code specifies a variety of corporal punishment and even death. So actually, the code of Hammurabi is very well known. No, for a certain code. There's a certain code always related with the code of Hammurabi. It's an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. No, ame to ang balaod mo nga panahon. Nakapatay ka, then pwede ka gyap patayon. You've hurt someone, you can suffer also from being hurt. So ame to bagang bulos-bulos ba? Oh, that was the law before because it actually sanctioned, it actually allowed corporal punishment and even death. When we talk about corporal punishment, ito pagkakastigo, no? So Pwede ito una nga panahon. Now, we can no longer do that. Even death penalty, the imposition of death penalty right now is not allowed because we are ratifiers of international laws not prohibiting the imposition of death penalty, and we have a local law or a domestic law actually prohibiting judges from imposing death penalty. So what we do now, the judges here in the Philippines, both for just for regional trial courts, because those crimes which are punishable by death or reclusion perpetua should be filed within the regional trial court. So regional trial court judges cannot impose death penalty. Even justices of the Court of Appeals in the Supreme Court cannot impose death penalty. Even how heinous the crime is, even how evil the person who committed the crime. uh, our judges, our courts cannot impose, are prohibited from imposing death penalty. But before, the Code of Hammurabi, the very first recorded law, no, the very first known body of law, which was recorded by encryption in stone tablets, 200 plus in nga provisions. But the basic premise of the Code of Hammurabi is an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth. So, kung mata gihapon it kapalit. No? Kung ngipon gapit kapalit. Kung kinabuhi ang naawat, kinabuhi gihapon it kapalit ito. So that was the basic premise of Hammurabi. Okay. And then we also have the Roman law, derived from 12 tables, which was written in 450 BC. So nagtitikaharan ni Nahiya before, guys. That's how we wrote our years before. No, mas nagtitikaharan ni Hiya. No? So, earlier in Hiya. No, mas naunaan 2000 BC. Okay. After AC na nga ni, nagtitikad ako ng what and number. So these 12 tables were a collection of basic rules related to family, religion, and economic life. The tables are based on common and fair practices generally accepted among early tribes. Okay, so again, these are actually more geared towards dealing with family rights, religion, and economic life. Okay, so di rin na here focused sa penalties. No, it's about more on property and the family. Okay. So, but then this one, this law is very important because the law actually established a procedure for courts. No? So, many and 12 tables. No? Table 1, procedure for court. So, ato, gin-recognize na ang mga courts. So, during this time, this was the very first time wherein ito may ading korte. Actually nga, for example, kung may gimpatay, kuwan anay. Hearing anay. Dili pwede basta-basta nga magkamian ng penalty. So this is actually a very significant development in our laws because for the first time there was a specific procedure followed in the imposition of penalties for crimes. Okay. Number 2, further enactment on trials. So again, here, nag-impose na improper conduct of trials. And table 3, execution of judgments. So may dinagod niya specific step by step, no? Unlike before na hurub-hurub la, istorya la. Here, there was already a specific procedure or step-by-step process on how things were litigated. No? So rights of familial heads, legal guardianship, and inheritance laws, acquisition and possession, like land rights and crimes, no, dili gyapon gin-recognize na ang right to properties. Dili parehan una nga maya kan right to tudlok na ito dita tutubit imo makitaan imo ito. This time with the enactment of canon laws, gin-recognize na and meets and bounds, no, ang boundaries and ownership ng mga tao during that time. Torts and delicts, no, laws of injury, public law, sacred law, supplement 1, supplement 2. So this was actually the very first law that formalized the procedure on how penal laws or on how criminal acts or omissions were actually being litigated. No? Okay. So that's the common law. Common law has its origins in the early English society. Common law is a body of early unwritten legal principles created from social customs, rules, and practices. So this was made legal upon the official declaration that it was the law of the land by English King Edward the Confessor in 11th century. So what we have to understand about common law is that diriya sinulat, unwritten niya. But these were actually accepted social customs, rules, and practices. But here in the Philippines, we do not apply common law. That's why, di ba, makabati kita, common law wife. Pero yung signgon, waray hira papel, waray hira kasuratan na mag-asawa hira. But they are called common law spouses because that concept was derived from the concept of common law in early English society. No, nga bisan diriya sinurat, no? Because it was an accepted custom, rule, and practice na himo na hiya nga balaod. But they are not written. What ay specific na sinulat na these are laws, but they were customarily followed by the people because nga there were customs that were already established. No? So, ito, we call it common law wife, common law spouse, because that is derived from that concept that even without kasuratan, both spouses are obligated to each other. Okay? So example lang to. Magna Carta, signed by King John of England on June 15, 1215. It guarantees basic liberties for all British citizens. One specific provision of Magna Carta was designed originally to prohibit the king from prosecuting the barons without just cause. So dinhi the Magna Carta. So actually now when the term Magna Carta is being used, it actually espouses several rights. No? More on rights na hiya. Human rights of persons. No? Magna Carta of disabled workers. Magna Carta of women. No, Magna Carta of health workers. So ano to? Magna Carta usually, what? It usually promotes, no, the rights of specific members of society. So for example, here in the Philippines, we have the Magna Carta for women. It actually espouses the rights of women, on against discrimination, the rights of women, on social welfare benefits. We also have the Magna Carta for persons with disabilities. It also promotes the rights of persons with disabilities against discrimination. We also have the Magna Carta for health workers. It also espouses the rights of health workers in the Philippines. So Magna Carta, most of the time it is to promote the right of specific members of society. So this then expanded to the due process of law, a fundamental cornerstone of modern legal procedure. So ang due process of law ngayon, nagtikang hiya on June 15, 1215 with the enactment of the Magna Carta. So due process is very important. What is due process? No? So later I will ask you and we will have an activity of what due process is all about. Okay? And Greek laws contributes to the Western thoughts about how the law coming from the ideas of great philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Notions of justice profoundly influences legal reasoning emerged from these Greek thinkers. So we actually have several philosophies coming from Greek laws. No? So amo to yung saring na Socratic, Platonian, no? Platonic, no? Aristotelian. So these are great philosophers of whom their philosophies are still applicable today. So dami ninduro. We will understand this better as when you delve deeper into social studies, no, in Greek philosophies. And canon law, also called, this one naman, this is more related to religion. So also called as ecclesiastical law. Canon laws, the body of laws made or adopted by the ecclesiastical authority in the 12th to 13th century for the government of the Christian organization and its members. So mostly canon religion, based on the Catholic religion. The impact of canon law propagated promptly at the moment the bishop instituted themselves as transitory rulers upon the downfall of the Roman Empire in the West. No, so and before, 'di ba? The religious leaders from priests, 'di ba? They were very very powerful even until now. If you go to England, no, ito mga king nila, it nag ordinated hierarchy is the what? The bishop. No, a bishop. Because they are still very powerful and many canon laws were actually um, espoused during the 12th and 13th century by the Christian organization. So this deals more with moral or morality, no, our sense of morality. No, kung ano itong moral, man immoral. They determine what actions are considered immoral, moral, and amoral. Okay? So yun. And lastly, for international laws, we also have Germanic laws, but these are more applicable to German tribes or Teutonic tribes, but more on customary laws of the family. And in the Philippines naman, so the early Filipinos have different forms of laws. Di ba? Damo natin mga tribo, damo natin mga dato. So each dato promulgated their own laws. No? These laws are written and unwritten laws. So may nakita written and unwritten. So in the early time, the written laws are formulated by the leaders of the time known as the dato. No? They are responsible in regulating the peace and order of their respective tribes. So yun nga, each dato had the autonomy to manage his tribe. Now, hiya't bahala. The two known codes in the pre-Spanish era are the Maragtas Code and the Calantiao Code. Now, the Code of Calantiao. And these written laws are based on their practices, customs, and traditions that have been practiced down from one generation to another. But now, medyo kuan na kita. Because now we already have an established society, many of our laws actually come from Spanish laws, English laws, no? So ating civil code and ating criminal law, ating labor code. So at iba ito ay borrow, ginhuram lang natin from the codes of other countries. No? So yun. But some of the laws that we had before are still applicable today, but not all. Diri na nga tanan. No, so now it's already a mixture of everything. Why? Why? Because we have been colonized several times. First by the Spanish, by the Spaniards, then came the Americans, then the Japanese, then the Americans, and then we had more foreigners coming in. We had Chinese. No, so damo na hindole. It's already a mixture of everything. And we also have the international laws, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Criminal Court, and damo ba, the Rome Statute, which establishes the International Criminal Court. So these things actually affect our penal laws in the Philippines. So that's why makikita niyo, it's a mixture of everything. Now, Diria focused has Spanish law, but of course, our revised penal code is greatly taken from the Spanish law. Like even in the translation, it was first written in Spanish. But then again, many of our special penal laws were already taken from English laws, American laws. No, so it's already a mixture of all laws of the world. So medyo complicated here. But then we will try to understand the concepts as we go along with our discussion on the introduction of the criminal justice system here in the Philippines. So, the Maragtas Code, by the way, was considered the oldest known written body of law in the Philippines. It has been said to be written in 1250 after death, no, by Dato Sumakwil of Panay. Calantia Code naman was said to be the second oldest legal code in the Philippines. It was written in 1933 after death by Dato Calantia of Panay. In pre-Spanish time, the head of the government unit is the dato or the raha or the sultan or the haji in some places. The unit is composed of settlements or villages called the balangay, but now we call it barangay. Now that consists of more than 100 families. The dato is also the chief executive, lawgiver, chief justice. Imagine the scope of the power of the dato, no? He is the executive, he executes the law, he is the lawmaker, the legislative, the chief justice, so also the judiciary and military head of the unit. So before really, it was the dato that was controlling everything, but the dato was not controlling the whole of the Philippines. The dato was controlling his tribe. No, he is the lawmaker, he is the executor, the chief executive, and the judiciary. But now in the Philippines, no, we don't do that anymore. With the passing of the 1987 Constitution, we already have we already established the three branches of the government. Number one is the executive branch, of course, headed by the president. We have the legislative branch composed by the upper and lower house, the upper house being the Senate, and the lower house being the House of Representatives. And the third branch of the government is, of course, our judiciary, headed, of course, by the Supreme Court. Okay, so these three, they have a separation of powers. Okay, so the executive department cannot infringe upon the legislative department, while the judiciary is there to do a check and balance to ensure that the acts of the executive department and the legislative department are in conformity with the constitution, being the constitution or the constitution being the highest form of land in the Philippines, being the fundamental and most important law of the Philippines, and whatever law which goes against the Constitution can be considered as an unconstitutional law, unconstitutional, and will considered as an invalid law. Okay, so I hope that you learned something from our discussion today. So I will be posting the sorry, the link for our activity this morning. So I hope that all of you will be able to answer the questions. I've already repeated the concepts that all the concepts that you have to understand with our introduction, and soon we will be moving forward to the pillars of the criminal justice here in the Philippines. So please answer the activity afterwards and make sure that you will submit on time. So you will have until 12 noon to submit your output for today's activity. The activity will both be your quiz and your attendance for today. So take note, I am very particular with attendance. I'm not I will not hesitate to to drop a student, to fail a student because of absences. So I hope that you will respect my time as I will do yours. So yun, answer our activity for this morning, and make sure to submit the same by 12 noon. If it is beyond 12 noon, there will be deduction. So the activity will be posted in the description box of this video. So thank you for listening to me, and I'll see you again next week. Hopefully we'll be able to meet face to face next week, weather permitting. Okay, I hope we'll have a better weather condition next week, but I want to ensure that you are all safe and healthy wherever you are, so I cannot compel you to come to school if it's not safe for you. So for the meantime that our conditions are not, weather conditions um, are not as conducive, no, we will have to stay, we will have to, we will need to have our lessons online. But for the meantime, thank you so much for attending my class, answer the activity for this morning, and submit the same by 12. So thank you so much and good morning. I hope that you will always be safe and healthy wherever you are. See you again next week. So bye for now and have a great day ahead of you.